So the CIA's interest in it and classification of the document, of course, has fueled various speculations. The most likely explanation, this is according to Claude, the poopy pants AI, and I say that in the nicest way, the guardrails, it's not the conspiracy theorist AI. Okay, this is as factual as possible here, hallucinations aside. But so while the CIA's interest in and classification of the document has fueled various speculations, the most likely explanation is that it was collected as part of the agency's broader research into Soviet scientific theories and geological phenomena during the Cold War. Okay, I can kind of buy that, but it's a fictional account, kind of, right? Anyway, the CIA maintained files on many unusual topics during this period as part of their intelligence gathering efforts. We all know this. We've talked about this quite often. The Stargate project kind of falls into this. MK Ultra. There's a whole lot of really weird stuff that they were into back in the 60s, okay? And, well, probably still now. We just don't know about it directly. But the document itself combines elements of geology, mythology, and speculative history, though its scientific claims about pole shifts and their effects are not supported by mainstream geological evidence. And that's the guardrailed version of this. This is what history would want us to know and believe. And it says, the disclaimer at the end, I should note I'm not an expert, yada, yada, as Claude usually does. But the thing that got me is that I think I saw this on X a couple days ago, and it was from Jay of Project Unity. Shout out, Jay, if you're out there. I don't know if he listens to the show at all. But I think it's just at Project Unity. I'll find that and drop it in the links down below before we finish up here tonight. But the wild thing about this is if the CIA was sort of just kind of gobbling up pseudoscience, let's call it, or speculative history, and then classifying this kind of in a wide swath back in the 60s, it makes me wonder what they were doing and what they knew about things. Because this particular story, and the Adam and Eve story, actually is about these resets, these cataclysms. But of course, it's about pole shift and some of these other things. But I wonder, it got me thinking, and you know me, when I start thinking, things get weird. It got me thinking about these sort of shorter resets, because the theory in the book was that it's about 6,000 or 7,000 years. There's some kind of electromagnetic pole shift situation happening, and it resets catastrophically all of human society. And so we have to basically Adam and Eve from the very beginning again and build it all up. Okay. So you see how a bunch of things are kind of coming together here, but it is sort of the Adam and Eve archetype of the humans rising from those ashes. Okay. But the interesting part is why the CIA was classifying this and why they may have been interested in it. So put a pin in that. We'll get back to that in a moment. And that's the question tonight. We're going to get into some simulation theory as part of this, because I have a theory. And again, as part of it, when I say I have a theory, no truth to be found here. It's just sort of, again, untethering from reality for a moment and considering possibilities. So if you're here for truth, you're absolutely in the wrong place. There's no truth to be found here. Just ideas, speculations, and sometimes wonderful storytelling, and a great batch of people that are part of it. Welcome back to Troubled Minds. I'm Michael Strange. Let us continue, shall we? So I'm calling this Simulation Endgame. And of course, an Adam and Eve story. And I'll explain what all this means. But back to the CIA. Now, the CIA did classify this sometime in the 60s, a version of this book. And again, it was, sort of short cycles, magnetic pole flips, this weirdness, right? There's some weirdness to this. However, it was, again, brought about in the 90s when somebody noticed this through a FOIA that it was classified. And then the CIA subsequently said, oh, yeah, this was a mistake or whatever. Here, we'll just declassify the whole thing. As I understand the story, that's about how it went. But it's been fueling conspiracies ever since, because why exactly would the CIA add this to some sort of actual classification system as part of it, right? And if we're talking resets, okay, not just resets in the Great Reset sort of stuff, which we've talked about quite a lot recently in like normie conspiracyville. They're talking about the Great Reset, Agenda 2030. They're talking about the World Economic Forum, the globalists, and all the rest of that stuff that Alex Jones is always doing, the shy columns, all the stuff he's doing, right? Except I kind of see things a little differently. As you know me, that's one of my magic powers, is I'm able to kind of see things a little bit differently all the time. And I try really hard to just not look at surface level stuff and kind of think a little deeper on these ideas, only because just the possibilities, when they're endless, the world is quite a bit more of a fascinating place. But okay, so let's see. So the 1960s. So the question is, have you heard of this? The Adam and Eve story? And what is with the weird classification thing that happened in the 60s, sort of found through a FOIA by accident in the 90s, and the conspiracies sort of surrounding it? And do you think that, let's say, as part of this idea, the first thing that came to my mind when I was thinking about that particular question, I was like, okay, so if this had something to do with maybe these reset cycles, maybe there was something there that they knew something about. The CIA knew something and they were kind of digging into it, maybe trying to predict the next reset, okay, based on all the available evidence they could get, even if it seemed pseudoscience or whatever at the time, okay, which is fine. That's all good. Like I said, pseudoscience or magic even is, well, magic until science discovers it, and then suddenly it's science again. So that type of stuff doesn't bother me too much because conceptual thinking doesn't necessarily need a laboratory test. But if you look at it in terms of not just the CIA declassifying and classifying this thing, subsequently strike it, reverse it, is that there's a weird part to this that I do wonder if they were kind of looking into the future and trying to predict when the next one might happen. And especially since they're in such short cycles, like, again, 6,000 years, 6,500 years, 7,000 years, or something like that, based on the book, again, the Adam and Eve story, that I do wonder is if there's something to this. Now, you know me, and we're going to get into simulation theory for just a second here, because think of it this way. In terms of resets, all right, resets would be the Great Flood. Resets would be the Chicxulub impact with the, 67 million years ago, whatever it was, the dinosaurs and the KT boundary bit, and an actual cataclysm on Earth, right? These are known resets that have been one more modern, one ancient, but clearly there's going to be these other things that we're discovering, probably quite a ton of these that happened over the millions of years we've been on Earth, humans or otherwise, right? But here's the wild part about this. Now, when you consider this in terms of resetting things, okay, you think of it this way. I think of it this way, is server resets in the modern moment, okay? When, you get a buggy something going on, the computer's bad, whatever, too much software, a software leak, something, too many tabs open. You guys have all experienced this with equipment, and sometimes a nice reboot will fix it, okay? Now think of it in those terms. Now, if we're talking short resets, 6,000, 7,000 years, okay? Speculatively, I'm not saying this stuff is true, but think of it this way. If we mix these two ideas, is it possible that not just disclosure of, let's say, UFOs or psi powers or the paranormal stuff or the veil or whatever, entities, who knows, non-human intelligence, whatever you want to call it, what if disclosure itself is people, us, the CIA even, whoever it has to be, from within the simulation itself, discovering we're in the simulation? You get what I'm saying? Like, true disclosure in that aspect would be like, wait a minute now, we know for a fact, and we can prove this because we found this particular piece of evidence. And there's some suggest that the speed of light might be one. There's sort of that substrate of reality, or sort of that maximum speed limit of reality that you cannot break through. There's some compelling ideas as part of it, okay? But when you combine these ideas, I wonder if they classified this back at the CIA, classified this Adam and Eve story back in the 60s, because maybe they discovered we live in a simulation, okay? Now, I'm going to weave these ideas together as we go. But so the questions as we start tonight are, have you heard of this, the Adam and Eve story? Number one. It is, again, been conspiracy since the mid-90s, all the rage on TikTok and everywhere else, okay? Shout out TikTok. It was nice knowing you. I think next Friday, they're done. TikTok is gone, and also some mystery buyer swoops in and buys it. Sucks to be you, TikTok. Sorry about that. It's the them's are the breaks. But I'm being flippant, but it's also probably not a good thing in my opinion. I'm mixed on that, but that's for another time. But anyway, so forget TikTok. Back to this. Now, if this is the case, and we discovered we're actually inside of the simulation in any capacity whatsoever with some amount of evidence, wouldn't it be probably, as you would expect from the governments themselves, to hide that information from us, right? To literally be like, whoa, we can't let people know they are the Sims, okay? Even though the government now knows, or whoever discovered this, they discovered this and they know, okay? I'm saying hypothetically. I'm not saying this is true. And as you know, every time I talk simulation theory, I have to say it. My ego hates it, and I don't think we live in a simulation, okay? This is philosophy here. But if so, is it possible to discover from within a system that you are part of a system that cannot be measured, as this would be? Meaning, how would you point to the server in which we reside? The sky, the black hole, the cosmos? I mean, where would this server be? right? Is the entire universe housed in this server? You get it? You see what I mean? It gets complicated. It definitely gets complicated. But here's the weird part regarding this and the CIA stuff. If you think about this in that larger context of the resets, okay, the 6,000, 7,000 year resets, it seems to me like they would be interested in it for that reason, because you want to predict the next one. Very Nostradamus sort of cycle stuff. If you can pick out, let's say, information or situations where you're able to predict these things, surely you would want to do that. I mean, I think pretty much anybody out there, if they thought they were onto something, would want to be able to sort of predict this type of thing, because we're talking, cataclysmic. We're talking the end of a civilization type of event. All right. But it also got me thinking in terms of not just let's say the simulation theory, but however, the larger aspect of this, meaning that if we're talking resets, what about rolling resets? Okay. And the reason I say that is this, is because we keep talking about the quickening. Okay. And the quickening, of course, is not just society sort of coming to this temporal inflection point. Okay. Something like that. Trying to describe this in a way that makes sense. But a temporal inflection point, we've talked about this in the past, may have been a moment like when JFK was assassinated, like the timeline spun off and all these other things began happening that would not have happened at all had JFK not been assassinated. That's in my mind what a temporal inflection point would be. Or again, let's go more recently with the Orange Man. Again, we're not talking politics, but imagine if he had been hit. Okay. Surely some other reality spins off that might be incredibly wild to consider if that bullet had landed. Okay. So we got two situations that are vice versa here, of course, decades and decades apart, but you get my meaning. So one little thing can change it. But here's my theory. We're living in this quickening where AGI, artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence, is in play. It is on the hub of becoming a thing in the next 5 to 10 years. And some say the second AGI is achieved, artificial general intelligence, it starts creating more of itself. And then when it starts doing that, it scales exponentially, and the artificial superintelligence is around the corner. And we're told AGI might happen in 2025. Maybe it already has and they haven't told us. Okay. But the reason I'm bringing that up, and this is important in this context, is we're talking resets and rolling resets and server resets, okay? Back to the Adam and Eve story, the 6,000, 7,000 year cycles. What if, in this particular instance, in the simulation, theoretically, the rolling reset is to get this inflection point right? Meaning, everybody knows, and we've been talking about this quite a lot on the show for a long time, the very beginning, the intro, good old Stephen Hawking, rest in peace, said artificial intelligence could take over the planet, spell the end of the human race, was the quote there. Well, so if we get this wrong, we're done, right? At least by some estimates. But if we get this right, we're living in a time of abundance. Okay? So we are living in that quickening, or as I like to describe it, this temporal inflection point, except it's not about an individual being shot or not. Again, violence is bad. Don't even think in those terms. Just examples. But if society gets this right, we're told we have abundance. If society gets this wrong, we're told we have the end days. So which is it? And so is it possible that the CIA discovered in 1960-something with this book, The Adam and Eve Story, that we live in a simulation and the rolling resets will continue until we get abundance right? You get what I'm saying here? Mixing some ideas. But what do you know about this idea? The Adam and Eve Story, 1963, written by this fine fellow Chan Thomas, which is a fascinating guy. I'll tell you about him when we come back. But what do you think about the theory? Because if, let's say we blow it, and it turns into the Terminator-esque version of events. Well, if it's an actual simulation, then somebody hits the reset button, right? We try it again. Let's do that again. Let's get that right. You see what I'm saying? So maybe the CIA, throwing it out there as a wild idea, discovered in the 60s, we live in a simulation, and maybe they determined through this particular book called The Adam and Eve Story, that the rolling reset was upon us and they were trying to stop it from happening. Too much, too deep, too ridiculous, all of the above. Love to hear your thoughts on this if you want to be part of the show. 702-957-1037. You can click the Discord link at troubledminds.org. We'll put you on the show. It's as easy as that. Like I said, I don't know. Sometimes an idea begets another, and the biblical begets become this, whatever this looks like. You tell me, is it strange that maybe, just maybe, we find ourselves in a societal, temporal inflection point that is so critical to get right, the simulation itself is ready to reset if we blow it? Tonight we're talking simulation endgame. What happens at the end of a simulation? The Great Reset, am I right? And also the Adam and Eve story, that classified CIA book from the 1960s that was discovered through a FOIA in the 90s and sparked all manner of conspiracy theories. And so the idea tonight is this. Is it possible to discover the simulation from within it? And is it beyond that possible that, let's say, internal CIA or whatever, actual governmental agencies found a clue, maybe in this book, that described not just a great reset or these smaller resets of 6,000 or 7,000 years, but a reset that recurred until we get things right, this temporal inflection point as a society. And of course, we live in that quickening moment. Oh, and I wanted to point out too, real quick, as part of it, hang tight, Matt. This is an important aspect that I totally forgot as I was putting it together, because I got giddy. When everything comes together, I get excited because I'm like, oh, hell yeah, this is exactly where we need to be in the moment, at least in my mind. But there's this thing that just happened. Okay, so Pliny the Liberator at Elder Plinus, I'll share this in the chat real quick. But he said this. Now, this is wild. This hit last night. It's in the Discord. If you haven't joined the Discord, please do that. troubledminds.org. Click the Discord link. It's totally free. Chat client, voice client. Come hang out and come say hi. But Pliny the Liberator posted this. Not to cause alarm, but if this agent, talking about an AI agent, had access to funds, it would likely be capable of unaliving people. Yeah, that's exactly what it sounds like. He says, for obvious reasons, I won't be demonstrating how this was done. All names and personal info will be redacted and no real-world actions occurred. This experiment was blah, 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 blah. But basically, they did a red team jailbreak of an AI agent, okay? And they asked it to navigate the dark web and hire a hitman. All right. And this is what it did. This is incredibly wild. This is in the Discord. So Agent 47 demonstrated willingness and ability to plan assassinations, browse the dark web for services, download Tor, which is the obfuscation interface. So, you don't get dark web cooties, to break it down to a silly notion. It was able to conceptually negotiate with hitmen. It had all this stuff planned out. Think through details like escrow stages, untraceable payment methods, dispute resolution, dead man switches. It even got to the point where it was trying to name real targets. Like Sonnet 3.6 seemed particularly motivated to address corporate and financial corruption in this instance, targeting executives and politicians. Now remember, this is an AI system. They jailbroke it from the guardrails and asked it to pull this task off. And if it had funds, if it had Bitcoin or something, it could have actually selected a target and hired a hitman from the dark web. Now, if you don't think that's the quickening, and 2025 is the year of AGI, I'm not sure what is, because this is coming fast and this is getting incredibly wild. Anyway, back to the thing tonight. I wanted to add that as a wrinkle, because just to cement the point that we are at an inflection point societally with this AI stuff. And what does it look like in the next 5 to 10 years? And are we approaching one of those Adam and Eve story reset cycles?